He left without looking back, just a suitcase, a smirk, and a promise that she could offer him the life I never could. I watched from the doorway as the man who once held my trembling hands traded love for luxury, unaware that the woman he chose would destroy him faster than I ever could. It's strange how time can turn pain into power and heartbreak into the sharpest weapon. Because in the end, he didn't just lose me, he lost everything he thought he wanted. If you've ever been abandoned for someone better, if you've ever watched love turn to greed right before your eyes, stay with me. You'll understand how I turned the deepest wound of my life into the empire that carries my name. And maybe you'll believe that sometimes revenge isn't loud, it's elegantly silent. The night he left still lives in my memory like a photograph I can't burn. The air was heavy, the kind that clings to your skin, thick with the scent of rain and something else, finality. I stood in the doorway, barefoot, holding the same mug of coffee I'd made hours before. It had gone cold long ago, but I couldn't let it go, just as I couldn't let go of him. His suitcase was already in the trunk, his hands resting casually in his pockets, as if this wasn't the end of years spent building a life together. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. That would have required emotion, and by then, he'd already spent his last drop on her. "You'll understand one day," he said, his voice calm, almost tender, the kind of tenderness that cuts deeper than cruelty. I wanted to ask him how I could possibly understand watching the man I loved walk away to chase money wrapped in a prettier package, but the words stayed locked in my throat, trapped between pride and heartbreak. When the car door slammed, it sounded like thunder, short, sharp, and final. The tires hissed against the wet road, disappearing into the darkness that had swallowed everything else in my life. I stood there long after the headlights faded, staring into the emptiness as if he might turn back. But he didn't. He never did. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every corner of the house felt haunted by echoes of us, his laughter in the kitchen, his cologne on the pillow, the warmth of his voice late at night when we used to whisper dreams we thought we'd chase together. I remember sitting on the floor that night, my back against the wall, knees drawn close, the weight of reality pressing against my chest like a stone. I didn't cry right away. The tears came later, slow and relentless, as if my body had to first accept that love could vanish so cleanly. I thought of her then, the woman he left me for. I'd only seen her once, at a business event, wearing a gown that shimmered like she owned the world. She had the kind of smile that belonged on magazine covers, not in real life. When he introduced us, his hand lingered on hers a second too long, and though I pretended not to notice, my heart did. It always notices what eyes can't admit. For weeks after he left, I lived like a ghost. My friends tried to help, offering empty words like, "You'll find someone better," or "Everything happens for a reason." But I didn't want better. I wanted the men who used to wake me with coffee and scribbled notes that said, "You make ordinary days extraordinary." I wanted the laughter that once filled our home. But wanting didn't change the truth. He was gone, and I was left with silence, bills, and a mirror that reflected someone I barely recognized. One evening about a month later, I found one of his old letters tucked inside a book. It wasn't special, just a note he'd written back when we first started dating. "One day we'll build something together, something no one can take away." I remember tracing the words with my fingertips, my tears smudging the ink until the promise blurred into something unreadable. That was the night I realized he hadn't just taken his things, he'd taken the dream we built together. But grief is a strange teacher. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, urging you to stand when you'd rather stay broken. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice small flickers of myself again. I started spending late nights at my desk, scribbling ideas, working through the ache by creating something that was mine alone. I didn't know it then, but those sleepless nights would become the foundation of my empire, the one that would someday make him regret every step he took away from me. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some nights I'd hear a car outside and my heart would leap, only to crash again when I realized it wasn't him. Some mornings I'd wake up reaching for his warmth, only to find cold sheets. But slowly, the pain began to feel less like a wound and more like a scar, proof that I'd survived what should have destroyed me. And yet, even as I began to rebuild, a small part of me still wondered if he ever thought of me when the nights got quiet, if he missed the way I believed in him, the way I stayed when no one else did. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but as I watched the first sunrise that didn't hurt to see, I whispered to myself, one day he'll see what he lost. One day he'll look for me in every success he chases, and I won't be there. That was the moment the fire began to burn, quietly, fiercely, in the ashes of the goodbye that ended everything. The morning after he left, the world looked the same, but I didn't. The sunlight that once felt warm now stung against my skin, like it was mocking me for believing in forever. I went through the motions, coffee, shower, work, but everything felt mechanical, hollow. My apartment still carried his scents, faint but persistent, as if the walls themselves refused to let him go. I tried to erase him, washed the sheets twice, packed his forgotten shirts into a box. But grief has a way of living between the cracks of things. It seeps into the spaces you can't reach. There was this one plant he had bought for me, a small jade pot with stubborn green leaves. He said it was low maintenance, just like our love. I laughed at the time, not realizing how ironic that line would become. When he left, I almost threw it out, but something stopped me. Instead, I put it on the windowsill, watered it every few days, even when I couldn't bring myself to eat. Maybe it was my way of proving that something he left behind could still live, even if love couldn't. The days bled into weeks. People stopped calling as often. Pity has an expiration date. The world moves on quickly, but heartbreak lingers in slow motion. I started spending my evenings at a small cafe near my office, the kind of place where nobody knew my name, or I could disappear in the noise of clinking cups and quiet chatter. I'd bring my laptop, open it, and stare at the blank screen. I told myself I was working, but mostly I was just surviving. Sometimes I'd see couples walk by, laughing, brushing fingers, whispering things that used to belong to me. Each time, a small part of me broke in, but another part hardened. It wasn't bitterness at first, just realization. Love, I learned, isn't a guarantee. It's a gamble. And I'd bet everything on a man who never planned to stay. One night, while scrolling through social media, his face appeared again, smiling beside her, both dressed in designer clothes, toasting champagne on some beach I couldn't afford to visit. The caption read, "Building our future together." The words sliced through me like glass. I slammed my laptop shut, trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. For hours, I paced the room, replaying every moment we'd shared, every promise he made. It wasn't just betrayal, it was an insult. He hadn't replaced me quietly, he'd showcased it like a trophy. That was the night something inside me shifted. I sat back down, reopened my laptop, and started typing. Not messages, not letters, plans. I didn't know exactly what I was creating yet, but I knew one thing. I would not be defined by his absence. If he left to find wealth, I would build mine from the ashes he left behind. I began small. Late nights turned into early mornings. I took freelance projects, studied business strategies, watched tutorials, and filled notebooks with ideas that kept me awake until dawn. At first, it was survival, a distraction from the ache. But soon, it became obsession. Each hour spent working was an hour further away from the girl who waited by the window. And as the months passed, I began to see progress. Small, fragile, but real. My savings grew, my projects expanded. I built connections, faced rejections, learned faster than I thought I could. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the fire. I'd whispered to myself, one more day, one more push. Because somewhere deep down, I wasn't just chasing success. I was chasing closure. But healing isn't a straight line. One evening, I came home to find a small envelope under my door. His handwriting. My heart stopped. For a moment, I forgot everything. The anger, the progress, the resolute. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single note. "I hope you're doing well. You deserve the world." It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like a ghost trying to apologize for haunting me. I sat there for a long time, the letter crumpled in my hands, until I finally realized what it meant. He was checking if I was still waiting, still broken, still his shadow. That night, I burned the letter, watched the paper curl and blacken until all that remained was ash and freedom. And as the smoke rose, I whispered the truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. You don't get to come back. From that night on, I worked not from pain, but purpose. I didn't want him anymore. I wanted something he could never buy. Peace, power, and self-respect. By the time autumn came, I had signed my first major contract. A small deal, but it felt monumental. As I walked out of the office that day, I caught my reflection in a glass door. Tired, yes, but different. My eyes no longer looked for him in the crowd. They looked ahead. Still, deep inside, a question lingered. Would he ever see who I was becoming? Will the day come when our paths crossed again, and he'd realize the fortune he abandoned for the illusion of wealth? I didn't know then that the answer was already written, and fate was waiting quietly to bring it full circle. Her name was Elise. I remember it now because it's hard to forget the name that once made my heart collapse. Back then, she was everywhere, in whispers, in photos, in the gleam of his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. The woman he left me for wasn't just beautiful, she was curated. The kind of beauty that looked expensive, like every hair strand had been handpicked by fate. Her diamond smile could light up a room and blind everyone in it, including him. I first saw her again by accident, or maybe fate had a cruel sense of humor. It was at a charity gala, one of those polished evenings where people wear their best clothes and their fakest smiles. My company had just started gaining traction, and I'd been invited as a small sponsor. I walked in feeling proud, a quiet sense of accomplishment filling the space where Heartbreak used to live. But pride is fragile, and that night, mine shattered the moment I saw them. He was there, in a tailored suit that fit him too well, the same smirk I once kissed now plastered across his face as if nothing in his world had ever broken, and beside him, Elise. Her gown shimmered like moonlight, every step deliberate, her laughter slicing through the music like champagne bubbles. When she turned her head slightly, I caught the diamond earrings, the very ones I'd once pointed out in a shop window months before he left. For a second, the room spun. My chest tightened and I fought the instinct to run, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, I straightened my shoulders. I smiled. I refused to give her, or him, the satisfaction of knowing I was still bleeding. They didn't see me right away. I mingled, pretending to be interested in meaningless conversations, though my pulse drummed with every stolen glance in their direction. When he finally noticed me, I watched his expression flicker. Surprise, discomfort, and then that forced charm he always used when caught off guard. Elise followed his gaze. Her eyes landed on me, assessing, curious, and slightly amused. She approached first. That smile again, flawless, practiced, the kind that hides sharp edges. She said softly, "You're the ex, right?" Her tone was gentle, but it carried a quiet triumph, the kind only winners use when meeting the ones they've replaced. I smiled back, steady, unflinching. "And you're the reason he finally left, I suppose." She laughed, light, melodic, insincere. He left because he needed someone who understood his ambition. Some people just can't keep up. Her words should have hurt, but instead they lit something inside me, a spark, small but dangerous. I realized then that she wasn't the woman who'd stolen him. She was the mirror reflecting everything shallow he'd always been. For the first time, I saw him clearly. A man chasing validation, not love. And her? She was validation dressed in couture. I didn't stay long after that. I excused myself politely, walked to the bathroom, and stared at my reflection under harsh golden light. My hands trembled slightly, but my eyes, they were calm. I looked nothing like the woman he'd left behind. There was a quiet strength now, when I hadn't noticed before. When I stepped outside, the night air felt different, lighter. The city lights blurred through my tears, but for the first time, those tears didn't sting. They cleansed. I took a deep breath, letting the pain dissolve into something sharper. Resolve. Over the next few months, I kept seeing their faces online. Lavish trips, luxury dinners, new ventures. It looked perfect. But perfection always cracks, and I could sense it even through the filters. Her smile started looking tighter, his posture stiffer. There's something poetic about watching the two people who broke you start to unravel under the weight of their own facade. Meanwhile, I was rising. My business began to bloom faster than I expected. Investors noticed, clients trusted me. Every win felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, but there was one victory I wasn't chasing anymore. Him. I didn't want him back. I wanted what he said I couldn't have, success without him. Then one morning, a message arrived in my inbox. His name. My stomach tightened. "Hey, I saw your company in the news. You've really done well. Maybe we could talk sometime." I stared at the screen for a long time. There it was, the first crack in their perfect world. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because power, I realized, isn't in revenge. It's in patience. The kind that watches quietly as karma writes the story you no longer have to finish. And as I closed my laptop, I smiled. Not the bitter smile of the broken, but the calm one of someone who knows the best endings are the ones that come naturally. Weeks passed after his message, yet I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every time I opened my inbox, his words sat there, a ghost waiting for permission to enter again. "Maybe we could talk sometime." Simple, harmless, but I knew better. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to see if I was still the same woman who'd once waited by the window, begging for scraps of affection. I wasn't her anymore. Still, curiosity has a cruel way of whispering when you least expect it. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through their lives again, his and Elise's. They still looked perfect, at least on the surface. The same golden couple everyone envied. But beneath those carefully filtered smiles, I noticed things most people wouldn't. Her eyes not quite meeting his hand always holding his phone instead of hers. Their captions shorter, colder. The fairy tale was beginning to wilt. I remember one post in particular, a photograph of Elise at a gala, alone. The caption read, "Sometimes strength means standing alone." Thousands of comments flooded in with praise and sympathy, but I didn't need to read them. I understood perfectly what was happening. The diamond smile was starting to crack. I should have been satisfied, vindicated even, but what I felt instead was something unexpected. Pity. She had built her world on illusions, the same way I once built mine on love. The difference was I had lost everything and learned. She was about to lose everything and still think she'd won. About a month later, fate, or irony, brought him back into my orbit. I was at a networking event for young entrepreneurs. My company had just partnered with a major investor, and I was there to represent the brand. I was mid-conversation with a potential client when I heard his voice. That familiar, careful tone, charming, practiced. The sound froze me for half a second before I turned around. There he was. Same man, same smile, but something was missing. The glow, the arrogance. His suit looked expensive, but it didn't carry power anymore. He noticed me instantly. Of course he did. His eyes widened just slightly before he masked it with that old grin. Wow, he said, stepping closer. You look incredible. I smiled politely. Success looks good on me. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck, that old nervous tick he had when he didn't feel in control. I've been meaning to reach out again. I saw your latest campaign. You've really built something impressive. His compliment didn't sting, it didn't even flatter me. It simply existed, like a breeze that touched nothing. Thank you, I said softly, glancing at his name badge. And you, still working with your partner? Something flickered in his eyes. He hesitated. We're taking a break, he admitted finally, his tone laced with discomfort. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to think. That's a shame. You two look so invested. He smiled weakly, but I could see the truth unraveling behind it. Elisa's name was no longer an asset in his mouth. It was a wound. And for the first time since he left, I realized that I didn't need revenge. Life had already chosen to humble him in ways I couldn't have imagined. We talked briefly, about business, about the past, but my heart didn't tremble. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't seeking closure anymore. I was embodying it. He asked for my card and I handed it over, not out of emotion, but power. He said, let's keep in touch. Maybe, I replied, smiling faintly, if our worlds ever align again. When I walked away, I didn't look back. That's how you know you healed. When the very thing that once shattered you no longer has the power to make you pause. Later that night, I sat by my window, the same one where I'd once cried over his absence. The city lights shimmered against the glass, and I could almost see my reflection overlapping with the skyline, stronger, sharper, brighter. I thought of Elise again. I imagined her sitting somewhere, still clinging to the illusion she fought so hard to keep, unaware that she was already losing him. It wasn't about triumph anymore. It was about peace, the kind that comes when you finally realize your story was never about them. It was about who you became because of them. As I watched the lights flicker below, I whispered a silent truth into the night. Let them have their mirrors and diamonds. I have my freedom. And with that, I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and slept, truly slept, for the first time in years. Because deep down, I knew the tides had shifted. The woman he left behind was gone, and the one who took her place was just beginning to rise. It's strange how silence can echo louder than any scream. That's what I thought when I first heard the news. A quiet whisper that spread through the same social circles that once worshipped them. Elise and Daniel have split. It wasn't a scandal at first, just rumors. A few whispers at parties, a missing ring in her latest photo, a statement that they're focusing on different things. But I knew the look of something breaking, and I saw it in every picture, every interview, every forced smile. The empire they built on vanity and greed was finally crumbling, and this time no one was there to hold it up. I didn't celebrate. I didn't laugh or call my friends to say I told you so. Instead, I felt something far more haunting, déjà vu. Watching them fall apart felt like watching an old version of myself die again. The same pain, the same disillusionment, the same desperate attempts to save something already gone. Weeks later, Daniel called again. I didn't answer. Then came the text. I made a mistake. Those 4 words should have sent a rush through my chest, the kind of vindication every betrayed heart dreams of. But they didn't. They just made me tired. I wasn't angry anymore, only disappointed. Disappointed that he still thought I cared, that he still believed my worth was tied to his regret. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. A few days after his message, I received an invitation, a formal one, to a business conference in Dubai. My company had been shortlisted for an International Entrepreneurship Award. My team was ecstatic. But what caught my attention wasn't the honor itself. It was the list of sponsors. At the top, Daniel's firm. When I arrived at the conference, I was prepared, composed, calm, dressed in confidence and quiet fire. I walked through the grand lobby of the hotel like someone who had nothing left to prove. But when I entered the ballroom and saw him on stage, I couldn't help but smile. He looked older, not in years, but in spirit. His eyes, once full of charm and certainty, now carried exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing too late that you gambled something irreplaceable. After his speech, he spotted me. The flicker of shock on his face was almost poetic. I could see the memories play across his expression, our nights in that tiny apartment, our plans, the promises he'd broken. For a moment, he looked like the man I used to know, before greed replaced love. We spoke later at the dinner reception. The air between us was filled with unspoken things. He tried to make small talk, to act casual, but beneath it all, guilt lingered like smoke. You've really made it, he said softly, as if he couldn't believe it. I had to, I replied. When people destroy your world, you either drown or you build another. He nodded, eyes cast down. Elise left, he murmured, almost to himself. She said I changed. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. You didn't change, Daniel. You just showed her who you always were." There was no venom in my tone, just truth. He flinched, as if my calmness hurt more than anger ever could. Later that night, while others laughed and toasted champagne, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The same skyline where, years ago, I dreamed of a life with him. Now it sparkled beneath my feet, no longer a dream, but a reflection of everything I'd built alone. That's when he joined me again. The air was quiet, heavy with everything unsaid. "Do you ever miss us?" he asked suddenly. His voice cracked just enough to remind me he was human, flawed, fragile, lost. I turned to face him, meeting his eyes one last time. "No," I said softly. "I miss the person I thought you were, but that man never really existed." He looked away, jaw tight, swallowing the truth like poison. I could tell he wanted to apologize, to explain, but I didn't need any of it. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a realization. When I left that night, I didn't look back. The past had finally run out of places to hide. But the story didn't end there. A week later, I got a call from my assistant, trembling, urgent. "Ma'am, it's Daniel. There's been an accident." I froze, heart pounding, the city spinning around me. After everything, after all the pain, the revenge, the silence, life had written another twist. When I heard those words, "there's been an accident," the world seemed to narrow into a single sound: silence. The kind of silence that hums in your ears, heavy and endless. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. Shock, fear, anger, they all tangled inside me like threads I couldn't separate. My assistant kept speaking, but her voice became a blur. "Hospital, severe injuries, asking for you." Why me? Why, after all this time, was I the one he wanted? I told myself not to go. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore, that the man who once shattered me didn't deserve even a moment of my concern. But there was a small, unrelenting voice in my chest, whispering something softer, older. "You once loved him." And that's what finally drove me there. Not forgiveness, not guilt, just the echo of a past I thought I had buried. When I arrived, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and grief. The hallways were quiet except for the faint beeping of machines. At the reception desk, the nurse looked up. "You're here for Mr. Daniel Reed," she asked, and I nodded. Her tone softened. "He's been asking for you since he woke up." I followed her down the corridor, my heels clicking against the cold tile, each step heavier than the last. When I entered the room, he was there, pale, fragile, hooked up to machines that hummed like ghosts. His eyes fluttered open when he heard me. For a second, I saw the boy I'd once known. Not the man who betrayed me, but the one who laughed under streetlights, who kissed me with dreams instead of pride. He tried to smile, but the effort made him wince. "You came," he whispered. "I did," I replied, standing by the window. The city lights spilled into the room, painting his face in gold and shadow. "Why?" He swallowed, eyes glistening. "Because I didn't know who else to call. Elise is gone. My friends, they disappeared when the money did." I didn't move closer. "And now you remember me?" I asked quietly. There was no bitterness in my voice, just truth. He looked away. "I was wrong, Anna, about everything." For a long moment, I said nothing. I just watched him, the rise and fall of his chest, the man who once walked away from everything good in his life. "You weren't wrong, Daniel. You were weak." He flinched. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and merciless. But it wasn't cruelty, it was honesty. He had chosen the easy path, the glittering lie, the comfort of wealth over the work of love. And now that choice had hollowed him out. "I wanted too much," he murmured, tears slipping down his temples. "And I lost it all." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "You didn't lose it, Daniel. You gave it away." He closed his eyes, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret etched across his face. Not the kind people wear for pity, but the deep, soul-breaking kind that comes when you realize the pain you caused can never be undone. When he reached for my hand, I hesitated. For a heartbeat, my instinct was to pull away, but then I let him hold it. Not because I still loved him, but because letting go sometimes means showing compassion, even when your heart remembers the scars. We stayed like that for a while, two ghosts bound by memories of what could have been. When I finally left, he whispered, "Thank you for coming." Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. I walked slowly toward my car, every step feeling lighter than the one before. Something inside me had shifted. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but release. I didn't owe him my pain anymore. The next morning, I received another call from the hospital. Daniel had checked himself out against medical advice. He didn't want help. He just wanted to disappear. That was the last time I ever saw him. But fate wasn't done crossing our paths. Not yet. because a few months later, when my company acquired a struggling real estate firm to expand operations, the report landed on my desk with a name that stopped my breath. Owner, Daniel Reed. Life, it seemed, had finally brought the story full circle. When I saw his name printed on the acquisition report, I sat completely still for a full minute. The office buzzed around me, phones ringing, keyboards clattering, laughter in the hallway, but all of it faded into silence. There it was, in black and white, Daniel Reed, owner and CEO, Reed Development Group. The same man who once left me for wealth was now the owner of a company drowning in debt, desperate for a bailout. My assistant had left the folder neatly on my desk, unaware of the history behind those 5 letters. She smiled when I looked up. "They're seeking an urgent investment," she said. "Honestly, it could be a smart buy if we move fast." A smart buy. Yes, poetic even. "Set up a meeting," I replied calmly, closing the folder before she could see my expression. "Tomorrow morning. I'd like to speak with Mr. Reed personally." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind wasn't racing with revenge. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. I thought about how far I'd come, how the tables had turned without me even lifting a finger. I had become everything he once said I couldn't be. Independent, successful, respected. I didn't need to ruin him. He had done that himself. But fate wanted me to witness it. When morning came, I dressed in a tailored black suit, clean, elegant, unshakable. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through stillness. As I stood before the mirror, fastening my watch, I realized how much I had changed. The woman in the reflection no longer sought validation or vengeance. She sought peace, wrapped in control. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. My office, all glass and gold, overlooked the city skyline. When Daniel arrived, my receptionist buzzed in nervously. "Miss Hart, your 10 a.m. is here." "Send him in," I said, voice steady. He entered slowly, shoulders tense beneath a wrinkled suit. The man who once radiated charm now carried the weight of defeat. His eyes flickered with something between disbelief and shame when he saw me. For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. "Anna." His voice cracked. I didn't realize that I was the investor," I finished for him. He looked around the office, his gaze tracing the walls, the view, the logo engraved behind my desk. Hart Industries. It was my name, my empire, the one I built from the ashes he left behind. "You've done well," he managed, forcing a smile. "I had to. You remember, don't you? Survival tends to make you resourceful." He nodded, eyes downcast. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was charged, humming with years of unspoken words. I finally gestured for him to sit. He explained the situation: declining revenue, failed projects, mounting debts. His voice trembled as he spoke, trying to maintain dignity. "I'm not asking for charity," he said. "Just a chance. I know what I'm doing. I can make it work again if I just had enough funding." I interrupted gently. He hesitated. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair, watching him closely. The same man who once told me I didn't understand success now sat across from me, pleading for the very thing I had mastered. "Do you remember when you told me love couldn't pay the bills?" He froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. "I remember," I continued. "You said I was naive, that dreams were worthless unless they came with a price tag." I paused, leaning forward just a little bit. "And now here you are, broke and in need of a dreamer's mercy." His jaw tightened, and I could see the shame flood his face. "You have every right to hate me," he said, his voice breaking. "But I swear, Anna, I never stop thinking about you. I see you everywhere I go. You're everything I should have fought for." I looked at him, my expression calm but unreadable. "You're right," I said. "I do have every right to hate you, but I don't. I outgrew that long ago." He blinked, taken aback by my tone. "Then what happens now?" I stood up, walking toward the window. The city stretched out before us, 1,000 stories of ambition and heartbreak glinting in the sunlight. "Now," I said softly, "now you'll learn that sometimes the people you abandon become the ones who hold your fate." When I turned back, I met his gaze with a quiet finality. "You'll hear from my legal team tomorrow. We'll buy your company completely. You'll get what's fair, nothing more." The words landed like a sentence he couldn't appeal. He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. "I understand." As he stood to leave, his voice wavered. "I'm proud of you, Anna, even if I don't deserve to be." For the first time, I smiled, not with victory, but peace. "You're right, you don't." He left my office, and the door closed behind him with a soft click, a sound that felt like closure. But deep down, I sensed something unfinished. Fate had brought him to my doorstep once. I had a feeling it wasn't the last time. For the rest of that day, I couldn't focus. Meetings blurred together, voices turned hollow, and every document in front of me felt meaningless compared to the storm quietly circling in my chest. I had done the right thing, the fair thing, but fairness didn't always feel clean. Sometimes it left a bitter taste, like victory wrapped in ashes. That night, long after the office lights went out, I sat by the window in my penthouse, staring down at the city. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably sitting in the dark too, realizing the last bridge he had left was gone. Part of me wished I didn't care, but the truth was, closure never arrives when you expect it. It creeps in through the cracks of compassion you swore you'd sealed. A week passed before I heard from him again. The acquisition had gone through smoothly. Redevelopment Group was officially under my company's control. My legal team called it a clean transaction. I called it a full circle. Then one night, as I was leaving the office, I saw him standing outside. He looked thinner, paler, as if life itself had been slowly peeling him away. When our eyes met, there was no anger in his, just quiet defeat. "I just wanted to thank you, Anna," he said when I approached. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You could have humiliated me, Anna, but you didn't." I looked at him carefully. "I didn't need to. You already did that to yourself." He smiled faintly, as if he agreed. "You always had a way with truth. It used to scare me." We stood in silence for a while, the city wind tugging at our coats. Finally, he spoke again. "I'm leaving, selling what's left of my things, starting over somewhere small. I needed to see you one last time." There was sincerity in his tone, raw, fragile, human. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the boy I'd fallen in love with years ago, but I knew better now. Sometimes people aren't cruel on purpose. They're just lost, chasing illusions that ruin them in the process. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said softly. He nodded. "You deserve everything you've built." He hesitated, then added, "I hope someday I can build something that lasts too." As he walked away, a strange calm washed over me. The ache that once haunted my chest had finally gone quiet. There was no joy in his downfall, only peace in knowing I no longer needed him to rise. Weeks later, I found out from a business journal that Daniel had moved to the countryside. He'd sold his remaining assets and disappeared from the industry entirely. No one knew exactly where he went, and for the first time, I didn't care to find out. But fate, as always, had its own plans. One crisp winter morning, I received an envelope in the mail. Handwritten, sealed in old-fashioned wax, no sender's name, just my own printed elegantly across the front. Inside was a short letter and a small, tarnished silver key. "Anna, I never knew how to say sorry in a way that mattered, so I left you this instead. It's the key to the place where we first built our dreams, the little house by the lake. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Maybe it was foolish, but I always thought of it as yours. If you ever visit, you'll find what I couldn't say there. D." I held the letter for a long time, tracing the faded handwriting. The house by the lake, our first home, years ago, when love was simple and promises still meant forever. I hadn't been there since the night he left. The thought of returning made something deep inside me stir. Not pain, but curiosity. That weekend, I drove out of the city for the first time in years. The road wound through familiar hills, memories rising with every mile. When I finally reached the old lake house, time seemed to have frozen it. The paint peeling, the garden wild, but the view still breathtaking. The same wind that once carried our laughter whispered through the trees. Inside, dust covered everything, yet the air felt heavy with nostalgia. I found an envelope on the table, the same table where we'd once shared late-night dinners and dreams. Inside it was a single photograph, the two of us smiling, taken the week before he left. On the back, in faint ink, he had written, "Thank you for teaching me what love really was, even if I learned it too late." I sank into the old chair by the window, staring out at the lake as the sun dipped below the waterline. The world was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. That was the last time Daniel ever reached out. Months later, I heard through a mutual contact that Daniel had passed away suddenly. A heart attack, they said. He'd been living modestly, quietly, alone. When I closed my eyes that night, I didn't cry. I whispered a prayer. Not for him, but for the girl I used to be. The news of Daniel's death reached me quietly, a short email from an old colleague who remembered our history. He passed peacefully, they said, a small funeral, barely anyone there. For a moment, I didn't move. The world around me, the hum of the city outside, the faint chatter of my team in the next room, all fell into silence. I reread the message 3 times, but the words didn't hit the way I expected. No rush of emotion, no tears, just a deep, echoing stillness that settled somewhere behind my ribs. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. The skyline shimmered under the morning light, glass towers gleaming like promises kept. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who once stood in the ruins of love, shaking with heartbreak. Life had taken everything from me, and then handed me back something far greater. In that moment, I didn't see myself as the woman he left. I saw the woman I became because he left. Later that week, a lawyer contacted me on behalf of Daniel's estate. Apparently, he'd left something in his will for me. It's nothing of great monetary value, the lawyer said gently over the phone, but it seems deeply personal. I agreed to meet. When I arrived at his small office downtown, the air smelled faintly of paper and time. The lawyer, a kind older man with weary eyes, slid a box across the desk. Inside was a leather journal, worn at the edges. He asked that you read it privately, he said. When I got home, I sat by the fireplace, the journal heavy in my lap. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to open it. But curiosity and something softer finally won. The first page was dated 2 years after he left me. His handwriting was uneven, hurried, but unmistakably his. If you're reading this, Anna, it means I'm gone. I don't know where to start except with the truth. The night I left you, I thought I was chasing a future, but I was only running from my own insecurity. Elise didn't steal me from you. I gave myself away because I was too weak to believe I deserved your kind of love. I turned the pages slowly, each entry unfolding a version of him I'd never known. He wrote about his regrets, his loneliness, the hollow satisfaction of money without meaning. He wrote about watching my rise from afar, saying it was beautiful and painful at all once. You didn't just survive, Anna. You conquered, and it made me realize that love doesn't weaken us. It reveals who's strong enough to carry it. By the time I reached the last page, tears had gathered at the corners of my eyes. Not for him, exactly, but for the years we both lost to pride and fear. His final words were simple, unpolished, human. If I could live again, I'd choose you, even if it meant having nothing. I closed the journal gently, holding it against my chest. The fire crackled softly beside me, casting warm light on the walls. It struck me that forgiveness isn't about excusing the pain. It's about freeing yourself from its weight. The next morning, I drove back to the lake house one last time. The air was cold, the water still. I stood by the edge, the journal in my hands. Goodbye, Daniel. You finally learned what love meant. I hope, wherever you are, that lesson brought you peace. Then slowly, I set the journal down on the wooden porch, the place where we once dreamed of forever, and walked away without looking back. Months passed. My company grew faster than ever. New investors, new ventures, new beginnings. My story was no longer about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about resilience. When people spoke my name now, it wasn't as the woman who was left, but as the billionaire she lost. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still think of him, not with longing, but with gratitude, because if he hadn't left, I never would have found myself. And in that realization, I found something rarer than revenge. Peace. The years rolled on like a slow, golden tide. Success had become my quiet companion, steady, ever present, and no longer something I chased to prove a point. I built more than a company. I built an empire of purpose. Every project I launched had meaning behind it. Mentorships for women who'd lost everything, programs to help broken hearts rebuild into powerful minds. And yet, even in triumph, there was still an echo of the past, not haunting, but humming softly in the background of my victories. One winter evening, I was invited to an exclusive charity gala in New York, the kind of event where elegance dripped from every chandelier and laughter mingled with champagne. As I stepped out of my car, cameras flashed, voices called my name, but all I could think was how surreal it felt. There was a time when I couldn't even afford the gas to drive to my old job. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal and gold. I moved through the crowd gracefully, shaking hands, exchanging polite smiles. Then, across the room, I noticed a woman watching me. Her eyes were familiar, sharp, calculating, yet tired. It was Elise. Time had not been kind to her. The confidence she once wore like armor was cracked. She walked toward me slowly, clutching her wine glass like a lifeline. "Anna," she said, her voice low but steady. "It's been a long time." I smiled softly. "It has. I heard about Daniel. He left a lot behind. Debts, mistakes. I tried to fix things, but..." She stopped, her voice breaking. "I guess I never knew what he really wanted." I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. I said quietly, "He wanted peace, and in the end, I think he found it." She nodded, eyes glistening. "You always had what he was searching for. I see that now." There was no triumph in hearing it, only closure. I didn't need her apology or her guilt. The woman who once envied me was now a mirror of who I used to be, lost, chasing validation through someone else's shadow. I said gently, "Elise, whatever you're looking for, stop searching in others. Build something that's yours. It's the only way out. For the first time, she looked at me not as competition, but as a reminder of what she could still become. That night, as the gala lights dimmed, I stood by the grand window overlooking the city. New York glowed like a constellation, bright, alive, infinite. My reflection stared back, calm and self-assured. I realized I no longer saw the girl who was betrayed. I saw the woman who rebuilt her world from ashes. The next morning, I sat in my office, the top floor of the glass tower that bore my company's name, Aurelia Industries. The name came from Latin, golden, reborn. It symbolized everything I'd lived through. My assistant entered with a message. There's a journalist here from Forbes. He wants to feature you in a segment titled The Woman Who Turned Betrayal into a Billion-Dollar Vision. I smiled. Tell him I'll give him an hour. When he arrived, he asked me all the usual questions, my journey, my success, my strategy. But his last question caught me off guard. If you could go back and change what happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, would you? I paused, staring out the window where sunlight danced across the city skyline. No, I said finally, because every wound carved the woman I became. I lost love, but I found purpose, and in the end, that's the richest thing I could ever own. The journalist nodded, smiling quietly. That's powerful, he said. After he left, I turned my chair toward the city once more. A breeze rustled the curtains, soft and cool. I picked up the framed photo on my desk, me standing beside my team on the day we opened our new headquarters. I traced the glass lightly with my fingers, then set it down with a small smile. I wasn't driven by revenge anymore. I was driven by peace, the kind you only earn when you faced everything meant to break you and came out shining. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the city lights began to flicker awake one by one. Somewhere out there, my story was still being told, not as tragedy, but as transformation. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to the night, not for anyone to hear, but myself. He left me for her money, but I became the billionaire she lost.